Welcome to Mission Oriented, a VeteranCrowd podcast that showcases veteran talent from both the private and public sectors. Their impact is everywhere. We are here to uncover it. Here's your host, Bob Louthan.
Welcome, everybody. This is your host, Bob Louthan. My guest today is Ryan Micheletti. He's the co-founder and general partner of the Veteran Fund located in Silicon Valley. Ryan, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm trying, Ryan, I'm trying to figure out when we first met. It has to go back to Vet Tech and sometime in the last 10 years, but it's been a pleasure to get to know you. You've got a lot of things going on. We're going to cover a lot of ground, but first I want to talk a little bit about your military background because it's different than, and it's unusual. You were in the California State Military Reserve, which is a different approach. Tell everybody what that is and some of the jobs that you had when you were involved in that.
Yeah, thanks. The California Guard is essentially a sister organization to the National Guard. The difference is that we're subject to Title 32 and not Title 10 of the United States Code. And so that puts us under the governor's authority, not the president's authority. So our main job, I was a radio operator. I was stationed out of San Jose, California. That's where I did my drills. I did 6 years there as a reservist, and I was tasked along with our team to stand up a domestic search and rescue unit. And essentially we're supposed to be the glue between FEMA and be able to respond to natural disasters like fires, earthquakes, et cetera, or man-made disasters such as a terrorism or radiological event. Fortunately, in my time, the worst thing that happened was, a couple fires around the state, nothing that we've seen recently, but it was a really great experience because I got the ability to work with a really good team to build something new within the military that is still alive and thriving today. So that was where I really kind of learned the value of working with a great team on a good mission.
And, it's just something I didn't know a whole lot about. So it's really interesting, that particular military component. You have been involved in the startup and community. You actually you have a business of your own, and you've been a startup entrepreneur yourself. Tell everybody a little bit about that business, and then we're going to get into some of the other stuff that you've done, in terms of the Founders Institute and Vet Tech, and then we're going to get into the genesis of the Veteran Fund. But you've been an entrepreneur yourself with your brother, I guess.
Yeah, back when we were in the reserves, my brother was a reservist in the Marine Corps. We had the opportunity to start a security company. So think physical security guards. And, we were like early mid-20s at that point. And so we did a lot of nightclub security in San Francisco that then translated to doing a lot of big events and venues. So we actually did security for the Super Bowl 50 after party. We've done massive events with 10,000 person Halloween raves. We've done Dreamforce. And what we learned through that process is that nightclub and event security is very painful and hard. And so we switched to be more of like a construction focused security company. So it's been around going on 10 years now. I'm not involved in the day-to-day anymore, but I helped launch it and start it. And my brother is the CEO and he runs it day-to-day. We grew it from, just literally us working overnight shifts at Pier 70 to what it is today. And in 2019, we were awarded I think it was the second largest veteran-owned business in the Bay Area by employee volume and count.
That's fantastic. Hey, let's talk about the Founder Institute. Tell everybody what that is.
Yeah, Founder Institute is the world's largest pre-seed startup accelerator. I've been head of operations there for the last 8 years, leading the team that helps scale us to 6,500 portfolio companies across 200 cities with a mentor network of 25,000 mentors.
6,500 portfolio companies? That's massive. Where do they all come from?
So our secret sauce here is that we're what we consider a pre-seed accelerator. So you can think of us as almost like a pre-Techstars or pre-Y Combinator. And so when you apply to other accelerator programs, they're limited based on volume. So maybe they'll get 1,000 people to apply, they'll accept somewhere around 10. And so where does 99% of the other founders and people go when they still need support, a network, the ability to scale and fundraise? So that's where Founder Institute really steps in. We're one of the only global organizations that focus on the pre-seed stage. And so we've been able to launch programs in places like not just Silicon Valley and New York and LA, but also in places like Kabul, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan. We're in about a dozen different cities in Africa. And so we, specialize in that pre-seed stage to help people go from idea to, MVP to fundraising.
It's fantastic. And do you run cohorts? What's the sort of the structure?
Yeah, there's a local, what we call the Core Accelerator, which is a 14-week part-time program. It's pretty intense. It's about 20 hours a week per founder. They join a weekly session, usually in the evenings. They'll do office hours with mentors, and then there's deliverables that they have to complete on a weekly basis. And so every week they're making these almost like a sprint, drastically making these improvements week to week. And so, going from week 1 to week 14, someone might start off with just an idea. They'll validate it, they'll incorporate it, they'll lay the foundation, they'll build their team. And then, at the end, we'll do a demo day or graduation. We also have a track that's for founders that already have a team and a product, but they haven't had breakout traction yet, and they're looking for that access to the network. So we put them through, it's the same process, it's just a different focus on other deliverables. Once they graduate that program, they go on to access the global network. They can join Funding Lab, which is a program that I run where we help them raise capital. And then there's access to investors and people through the Founder Institute network. What I think is really interesting is on the back end of that, we actually created a program called VC Lab. And this was started a few years ago with the idea of, can we take a structured approach similar to what we've done with Founder Institute, but launched venture capital firms all over the world? And this goes back to a time where I think our run rate at Founder Institute was creating 800 to 1,000 companies a year. But we also realized that we needed to create more democratized access to venture capital, because at that time, I think it was still 50% of VC deals were done in Silicon Valley, and the other half was, essentially China. And so what we wanted to do was create the same model where when we started Founder Institute in 2009, our vision was to globalize Silicon Valley. How do you create Silicon Valleys in places like Lagos, Nigeria, or in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam? And so that fortunately over the last 14 years, like you're seeing that, you're seeing these different ecosystems develop, but the same thing needed to happen in the venture capital community. And so to date, VC Lab, I think, is on its 11th cohort. We've put I think this last cohort, we had over 3,000 general partners apply to the program. I think we selected the top 200 or so. And then they also need to go through this super intense process where they need to meet deliverables, hit certain milestones. And to date, we've helped accelerate over 250 venture capital firms.
You know how much capital that the 250 venture capital firms might have under management that's being put to work?
I don't have that number offhand because I'm not focused on launching that program, but I do know that about $30 million of what we call PACs were signed this month. PACs are essentially a bridge to a commitment to invest in these funds. And so we're seeing what I think the most exciting piece of that is most of these funds are in emerging markets or developing markets. So we have a lot of focus in South America right now. There's some really interesting funds being created in Europe. And so this is an exciting time where we can essentially take the VC Lab network of these funds and the Founder Institute network of founders and bridge them together in something that we call the FI Venture Network.
Well, folks, as always, we're going to put links to all of the things that Ryan and I talk about today in the show notes. So we'll put information on how you can find out more about that. Let's jump ahead. Let's talk quickly about VetTech, that particular program as well, because I think that is a nice segue into what's going on with the Veteran Fund.
Yeah, I think so as well. So let me back up and give you a little prehistory of VetTech. So I was lucky enough to be born and raised in Silicon Valley. So I grew up kind of looking at tech startups and seeing what was happening in the industry. And early on, I knew that if I wanted to be on the forefront of what was happening, I needed to be in the technology industry. And so when I was in the reserves and in college, I always knew, okay, when I'm out, I need to go and jump into tech startups. And like every ambitious, 20-something-year-old, I immediately just dove headfirst into the startup world and, figured it out on my own. Now, after 4 years of being a starving entrepreneur living in my parents' basement, we started figuring it out. We had launched Shield Core Security, the security company I mentioned. I was working with a couple different founders, and I actually found my way into the Plug and Play Tech Center, which was and still is a very large international startup accelerator and incubator. They're, I think, one of the largest startup investors by volume. And in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley, they have a massive 180,000 square foot facility. They've got a ton of corporate partners. They've got a lot of startups that are headquartered there, and then they do a lot of events. And so one of the startups I was working with at the time was headquartered there. And that's where I met a gentleman named Bo Rogers, who was a Navy vet. I think you know Bo as well.
Yep.
Him and I, hit it off. We started having lunches and coffee together. And we realized that even though 200,000 veterans were leaving the service every single year to a high unemployment rate, there was no startup resources for them. So this is before Bunker Labs, and I think Patriot Boot Camp was just getting started at the time. So there was like business plan boot camps and things that were way more traditional business focused, but nothing that was tech focused. And so we wanted to essentially create an accelerator that focused on military veterans. And so we utilized our access to the Plug and Play Tech Center because Bo is a senior advisor there. We were able to bring in veterans from outside of California into the Plug and Play Tech Center, where they would receive mentorship, they would get access to investors and corporate partners, and basically mentorship from the VetTech team. So we launched VetTech as a nonprofit. We brought in a bunch of mentors and people to help. We started working with startups. Probably our most well-known startup that we worked with was Instant Teams. Instant Teams now is a big, military spouse-led company that helps provide remote work for the military spouse community. They raised $13 million last year. And I still remember the phone call I got from Liza and Erica. They had this idea of creating a remote workforce for military spouses. And I had met Erica previously with her last startup through VetTech as well. And so VetTech was basically this clearinghouse of veterans in the technology industry.
So you're listening to the Mission Oriented podcast on the VeteranCrowd Network. My guest is Ryan Micheletti, the co-founder and general partner of the Veteran Fund. Ryan, let's talk about now the Veteran Fund and how is that coming together? Because this is something that's fairly new. We were together in San Francisco now about 2 months ago at the MilVets startup conference, which hands down one of the best conferences. I'm looking forward to the next one. But how did the Veteran Fund come together? Let's talk about that.
So when I moved from VetTech into Founder Institute, I essentially took the work I was doing at VetTech and I brought it into the Founder Institute network. So now, instead of just having a nonprofit based out of Plug and Play Tech Center, now we had VetTech plus Founder Institute. So if you think of Plug and Play and Founder Institute as these two massive international engines for startup creation and growth, VetTech was at the intersection of both of those. And so we launched something at Founder Institute called the Veteran Founder Initiative. It was essentially a program of scholarships allowing veterans to come into Founder Institute and take the program for free. We then grew that into a special, what we call Veteran Founder Lab program, where we took seed stage veterans and put them through a fundraising process similar to the Funding Lab program that we run right now, but it was partnered with VetTech and some other organizations to help them raise capital. And that was really effective. One of those companies, Refactor, led by Air Force veteran Mike Frazier, had a successful exit in 2021. And that was really the catalyst for the Veteran Fund, because it got us thinking of what's next. Like, what does the military community need? And, looking at the ecosystem and talking to Mike and several other founders, it was clear that there needed to be a fund that focused on pre-seed veteran founders. There's a lot of really great veteran venture capitalists out there. Not all of them focus on the pre-seed or seed stage. Some of them are Series A and beyond. And fortunately, we're seeing a lot more companies come into that seed and sometimes pre-seed stage. But we really wanted to leverage the access that we had to VetTech, Plug and Play, Founder Institute, but also provide capital to the founders. And so I reached out to Mike Sherbakov, who is my friend, and he also runs the Founder Institute San Diego and the veteran vertical of Founder Institute. And I talked to him about the idea of launching a fund. And he was very interested in it. He had always wanted to launch a fund. And then we reached out to our third general partner, Justin Nahama, who's the general counsel for the Honor Foundation. He's Deepak Chopra's lawyer and COO of his foundation. And Justin just overall is a really great advocate for the veteran startup ecosystem. So he immediately saw this and wanted to be a part of it. And then we brought in our fourth general partner, Lisa Song Sutton, who is a total rock star. She won Miss Nevada, used that as a platform for good, ran for Congress. She scaled multiple 6 and 7 figure and 8 figure businesses. And so she's been big in the impact and real estate investment space, and had actually been interested in starting a fund and has been courted to join other funds. But when she found out what we were doing, because her father was a longtime Air Force veteran who had recently passed away, she immediately jumped in and wanted to help. And so we launched the Veteran Fund late 2021, but really early January of 2022. And we've been off to the races ever since.
So when you went to pitch potential investors, limited partners for the fund, give me the pitch. Why invest in veterans, I guess, is the question. I know the answer, but I want to hear you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're seeing it right now with the SVB collapse, and you're seeing it with what's going on in the startup ecosystem. Right now, you need to back resilient founders building big businesses. And from when I first started VetTech, I mean, there was a handful of veteran tech entrepreneurs. Now, thanks to organizations like Bunker Labs, like Patriot Bootcamp, and many, many others, you're starting to see this emerging trend of veterans wanting to get into the startup realm. And so I think the capital available to them is still catching up to it. But here's really why you want to back a veteran entrepreneur. It comes down to leadership, resilience, and purpose. When you look at what makes a really good startup founder, they need to have all three of those things. And leadership, that's sort of a given. We believe that the military is the greatest leadership incubator in the world. And I think no one could really argue against that. Starting a startup is extremely hard. It takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of time. And you really do need an excessive amount of resilience to do it. And so veterans are naturally resilient because of the training that they've had. More importantly, in order to have that resilience, you need to have a deep purpose behind what you're doing. I see it a lot. Founders have this idea of what it means to be a startup founder. Maybe they want to make a lot of money, but the reality is that that's the best founders in the world aren't doing it for money. They're doing it because there's a deep purpose behind it. And I think veterans are, just as a cohort, as individuals, they've already passed that virtue test where they've raised their right hand. They said, I believe in something bigger than myself, and I'm willing to sign on the dotted line and put my life on the line for that. And so if you were to just kind of pull back and start with an individual person, an archetype, a veteran founder is one of the most powerful change agents that we have to actually drive positive impact in the world. And so if now you can take a veteran founder if you can now back them with, an incredible business network with the right team and the right mentorship, if you can provide them with capital, and if you could kind of fuel them with all of the right resources, you've got a very, very good chance of that company being successful. And so we've worked with, we have 7 portfolio companies right now. We're going to invest in 25 throughout the life of the fund. And I can say this, like, even in the turbulence we're seeing now, all of our portfolio companies are thriving and they're doing really well because of the experience that they had in the military.
Yeah, it's interesting that the people that have been getting shot at don't get too excited about little bumps in the road like this. Hey, what was the last 2 weeks like? I mean, you're in Silicon Valley. We have the implosion of Silicon Valley Bank. What was that Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday like? From somebody on the ground out there.
It was certainly chaotic. You would see email correspondence from portfolio companies, from LPs, from people within accelerators, just kind of sharing info and details. We were lucky enough, both on the Founder Institute and the Veteran Fund side, not to be directly affected by SVB. We didn't bank with them, and what we did as the fund managers, we immediately contacted our portfolio companies, jumped on sort of like what we would call like an emergency call to make sure like that they were protected from what was going on and that they had the right strategy. None of them banked with SVB, fortunately. So from a direct impact, like, we actually weren't affected by it, but it certainly shook Silicon Valley to its core. And I think we're still seeing some reverberations from that. I do think the dust is settling a little bit. I'm hoping that this doesn't turn into something much larger. But I do think that, this is going to forever change sort of the way that venture capitalists view risk, as well as portfolio companies.
I want to probe you on that concept right there, because I fear that like a helicopter mom swooping in to protect their child, that the federal government swooped in and protected. Are we going to regret this? Are we going to get more of the wrong type of behavior because we've protected the wrong type of behavior that led to this demise of the bank? Any thoughts on that?
I think that this was a regulatory issue where the people who were supposed to make sure that the bank was in compliance and had the right liquidity levels and were making the right investments, clearly they weren't. And so that created this fear, and then really, like, SVB collapsed because of the run on the bank. I do think that there is a regulatory issue there. Frankly, I think that a lot of venture capitalists are, and I saw this on LinkedIn and Twitter, right after it, in the middle of when it was happening, people were almost blaming venture capitalists for pulling their money out. But VCs are depositors, just like founders are depositors. They should be protected to a certain level. And, if anything, like, this goes to show that, like, maybe, the banking system, at least with SVB, I mean, they were using deposits to do venture debt. They were using deposits to invest in these bonds, which were affected by the increase in interest rates. And so I think, like, there's this fundamental tremor that's been happening ever since we started quantitative easing, go from, like, the 2008 financial crisis. That was like a giant band-aid that is carried over. But then now that we're increasing interest rates, it's starting to, like, create these fissures. And I think it's really important that the banking system is maintained. You could argue that, like, the depositors should be more aware of, like, the banks that they're putting the money into, and they should be looking at, how the bank's balance sheets are allocated and what investments they're making. But here's the reality. The regulators didn't even know. They couldn't even keep track of what SVB was doing. And so how could a regulator, whose job it is to make sure that the bank is making the right investment decisions, if they can't do their job, how's an ordinary depositor supposed to do that? And so I think, like, you are going to see some fundamental changes there. I do agree with your helicopter parent, though. It's like there's going to be some unforeseen consequences of doing this. And, certainly, like, I don't think the government should be used to just, bail out these banks and creates risky situations where this type of thing might happen in the future, or even worse, be relied upon in the future.
Let's talk a little bit about the future now. That's great insights on Silicon Valley Bank. Let's talk about the future. What are you guys, at the Veteran Fund seeing? What do you think is going to happen over the next couple of years here? What are you guys trying to put in place?
So there's a lot we could discuss about the future. So let's start with the short term. We believe that there's some pretty big challenges that humanity is facing. And if you look at our tagline is protecting America through venture capital, but we're not necessarily focused just on America. There's problems that are plaguing the entire world that we think entrepreneurs are the only ones that can really solve it. I don't think you can rely on government. You can't really rely on large corporations. It really comes down to a person with a purpose who wants to make a difference and build a team and dedicate their life to changing the world. That's really what it comes down to. And if we go along with our thesis that veterans are actually really great people to do this because of their leadership, purpose, and resilience, then what we need to do is, if we want to make a big dent in the world and make a positive impact, we need to be creating veteran founders, veteran tech startup founders at scale. And so our vision for this is the following. Fund one is a small $20 million fund. It's, to get us going, build a track record, invest in great companies, and really kind of kickstart this. This is really our life's work. And I think we have a couple different mechanisms that we're lining up. So for founders that are at the very early stages of their startup journey, let's say they're at the idea stage, they can go and join the Founder Institute Veteran and Military Family Accelerator. It's virtual, but it's based out of San Diego. One of our general partners, Mike Sherbakoff, runs that, and I support him as well through that process. And they're able to go through that business building component. And the companies that come out of that program are top notch. And so if you can survive a Founder Institute cohort, there's a good chance that you're going to build a good business and survive, the business building, pieces of that. So we can now create founders at the very earliest stages that then can get fed into other programs like a Techstars or a Y Combinator, or we can fund them through the Veteran Fund or through our various partners that we work closely with, other VCs and emerging fund managers. And then the future is to grow the Veteran Fund. So, we think Fund 2 could be 50 million, maybe more. We certainly want to go on to Funds 3 and 4, but that's, we're talking decades now of a journey. But our vision really is to back the best veteran founders through the Veteran Fund, but also help with the deal flow creation. And this kind of goes back to, our theory of ecosystem building at Founder Institute. If you look at how good ecosystems are built, it always starts with building companies and founders. If you don't have the founders in the ecosystem, then nothing else matters, right? There's no investors, there's no co-working spaces, there's no accelerators. It starts with the creation of those founders and those companies. And I view the veteran ecosystem as an ecosystem, even though it's across the United States and these different regional ecosystems. I view it as its own ecosystem itself. Much like you could say, if you want to start creating the ecosystem in Kazakhstan, you need to start by creating companies. When you create companies, those companies then need to raise capital. They need to go and rent co-working space. They need to go and hire people. And so what you saw happen in Silicon Valley, going way back into the 1950s of creating companies that then started to grow in that area. We're trying to do the same exact thing with all of our partners collectively for the veteran startup ecosystem. So we love Bunker Labs, we love Patriot Bootcamp, we like working with all these, we love Vets in Tech. All these partners are really on the same mission. And what I think is very unique is if you look at other ecosystems, there's a lot of competition within it. The veteran ecosystem, there's a lot more collaboration. There's certainly still competition, but there's a lot more collaboration than what you see in other ones. So now you're taking highly resilient people with great skill sets in a very collaborative ecosystem. And I think what you're going to start to see in the future is that veteran entrepreneurs will start outperforming their peers. non-veteran founders, and that ecosystem is going to continue to grow, then all of a sudden you're going to start seeing some of the top leaders of our country come from the veteran technology area. And that's really our goal, is how do we create the next generation of great American leaders? And I guarantee you they're going to be veteran technology executives.
I would add one other thing. I've been focused on this really since 2008. And to me, the thing that's most striking this year is that I think that this effort is finally gaining some critical mass. It's very evident to me that people are starting to get exactly what you just spoke about. I mean, it's been bits and pieces, but now I actually think this thing's snowballing a little bit, and I'm thrilled about the whole thing. I think it's all coming together.
Yeah, and I think that was most evident at Tim's event, the MilVet conference. So you could tell, like, just bringing, I mean, we've known each other for half a decade, but we've never met in person. And so that congregation of the people who are at that conference, I mean, I think it's just going to continue to snowball. And so I give Tim a lot of credit for putting that conference together, and we look forward to the one next year as well.
Oh, I tell you what, he needs to take that thing on the road and have it, East Coast, South, all over. Fantastic. Ryan, we've had a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on the Mission Oriented podcast. I really have enjoyed this.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Really enjoyed it as well.
Hey, you've been listening to the Mission Oriented podcast on the VeteranCrowd Network. Again, my guest has been Ryan Micheletti, who's the co-founder and general partner of the Veteran Fund. You'll be able to find links to get in touch with Ryan and the funds, and as well as the Founder Institute and other things that we talked about today on the show notes. Ryan, thank you so much for being my guest. I'm going to throw out an Army Bravo Zulu to you for your performance today. Thanks so much. And that's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to Mission Oriented. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and you won't miss an episode. To learn more about Mission Oriented and the VeteranCrowd Network, visit us at www.veterancrowdnetwork.com.